The wig came off in Mara Bennett's fist before the bride even knew what was happening. And in that 1 second, 300 wedding guests watched the most powerful family in the state fall apart. "Don't marry her, Ethan." The scream ripped through St. Augustine's Cathedral half a breath before the priest could say the word, husband. The organ music died mid-note. Every head in the pews turned at once. The livestream camera mounted near the altar swung hard to the left, still rolling, still recording every second of what was about to happen. Standing at the end of the aisle was Mara, not in a gown, not in anything close to wedding attire, but in her gray and white housekeeping uniform, soaked from the rain outside, her chest rising and falling like she'd sprinted the last mile to get there in time. Her hands trembled. But her eyes never left the woman in white standing at the altar. Ethan Whitmore turned first. Steel heir, self-made beyond his father's fortune, a man who prided himself on reading people before they ever spoke, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, his face went completely blank with shock. The woman who had quietly cleaned his family's mansion for the last year was standing in his wedding, screaming his fiancé's name like an accusation. His bride, Selena Cross, didn't look confused. She looked caught. "Security," she snapped, her voice cracking through the silence. "Get her out. Now." 2 men in black suits broke from the side wall and moved fast down the aisle toward Mara. She didn't run. She didn't even step back. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, creased photograph, raising it high above her head so every camera and every guest could see it. "Ask her why she changed her name 6 years ago," Mara said, her voice shaking but carrying to the back pew. "Ask her why she's never once let anyone touch her real hair. Not her stylist. Not her own mother. Nobody." Selena's face drained white. Ethan's hand, still holding the wedding Bible, dropped to his side like it had turned to stone. "What is she talking about?" His voice was barely audible. "She's obsessed with me," Selena said, spinning to face him, panic flickering behind perfectly lined eyes. "She's been following me for weeks, Ethan. She's unwell. Don't listen to a word she—" Mara reached the altar steps before security could close the distance. Selena moved first. She lunged, slapping Mara across the face hard enough to snap her head sideways, then grabbed a fistful of her uniform collar. That was the mistake. Mara caught Selena's wrist mid-motion, steady as stone despite the sting still burning across her cheek. And before the guards could pull her back, before Ethan could say another word, before Selena could even register what was happening, Mara's hand shot upward, closed around the crown of soft blonde curls pinned beneath the cathedral veil, and pulled. The wig tore free in one clean motion, curls, veil clip, and all, leaving Selena standing frozen in front of 300 people and a livestream camera that was, at that exact moment, being watched by over 4,000 strangers online. A single gasp rolled through the cathedral like a wave hitting stone. Beneath the wig, Selena Cross's real hair was shaved down to patchy, uneven stubble, the kind of cut that happens in a hurry, more than once, over months, not the kind that happens by choice. And just above her left ear, unmistakable even from the back pews, sat a tattoo. A small black raven with its wings spread wide, a single silver line slashed clean through its chest. The exact mark burned into the photograph still raised over Mara's head. The exact mark that belonged to a woman investigators had declared dead 4 years ago, after she disappeared with $19 million from a private research clinic's patient trust accounts, and left 2 nurses trapped inside a records room that burned to the ground before anyone could pull them out. Ethan stared at the tattoo like it might reach out and burn him too. The priest quietly closed the ceremony book. Near the back of the cathedral, an older man in an immaculate tuxedo, Selena's father, began inching toward a side exit, careful, unhurried, like a man who'd rehearsed this exit 100 times in his head. He didn't make it 3 steps. A man sitting quietly in the 9th pew, a man none of the 300 guests had paid any attention to all morning, rose to his feet and pulled a badge from inside his jacket. "Nobody," Detective Marcus Rourke said, his voice calm enough to be terrifying, "is leaving this cathedral. Not until someone explains why a woman who died 4 years ago just tried to marry into the Whitmore family. 12 days earlier, none of this seemed possible. 12 days earlier, Mara Bennett believed this wedding was going to be the happiest day the Whitmore estate had seen in a decade, and she had absolutely no idea she was about to blow it apart on livestream in front of the entire East Coast social register. The Whitmore estate sat on 11 private acres just outside the city, all pale stone and glass, gardens trimmed into lines so exact they looked less like landscaping and more like a blueprint someone had brought to life. Ethan had inherited it after his father's sudden death 3 years earlier, but he'd spent most of his adult life turning Whitmore Steel into something far bigger than his father ever imagined. He was 39, deliberate, careful about who he let close, and the staff respected him for one simple reason. He noticed things wealthy men usually didn't bother to notice. He knew which gardener was saving to bring his mother over from Manila. He knew which chef had a daughter starting nursing school in the fall. He also knew that his newest housekeeper, Mara, always arrived 20 minutes early and left every room spotless, even the ones nobody had asked her to touch. What Ethan didn't know was why she'd really taken the job. Before she ever picked up a mop inside that mansion, Mara had spent 6 years training as a forensic document examiner, the quiet, meticulous kind of work built on handwriting analysis, altered financial records, and fraud too careful for most people to catch. Her career ended the same month her older brother, Daniel, was arrested for a fire that killed 2 nurses at Ashford Research Clinic. Daniel had worked there as a facilities technician. Investigators claimed he disabled the fire suppression system and stole a shipment of experimental medication before the blaze started. He died in custody 8 months later, still insisting he'd been framed. Mara never believed the official story. One image from the case file had haunted her for 4 years. A grainy security still of a woman leaving the clinic minutes before the fire started, hood pulled up against the wind. A sudden gust had exposed just enough skin above her ear to reveal the edge of a tattoo. Investigators identified the woman as Dr. Vanessa Croft, the clinic's financial director, who vanished that same week with $19 million in patient trust funds. A body recovered from the records room was later confirmed to be hers. Case closed. Mara never believed that identification either. The body had been burned beyond recognition. No dental records, no fingerprints, nothing but a convenient conclusion that let everyone stop asking questions. When Ethan Whitmore announced his engagement to Selena Cross, Mara saw her for the first time at a garden party from a distance, elegant, magnetic, always flawlessly composed, and always strangely vague about her past. Selena said she'd grown up overseas. Moved around a lot. Didn't like talking about family. For the first month working in that house, Selena treated Mara with polite indifference. Until the night Mara walked into her dressing room without knocking, and saw something she was never supposed to see. Selena was standing in front of the mirror, both hands gripping a blonde wig, adjusting it beneath the light. Their eyes met in the glass. And just before Selena yanked a mesh cap down over her scalp, Mara caught it. A dark shape above her left ear, half hidden beneath thin, damaged hair. "You didn't see anything," Selena said quietly, without turning around. Mara had no idea, standing in that doorway with an armful of clean towels, that she'd just found the first loose thread in a conspiracy that would end with her tearing a wig off in front of a cathedral full of witnesses, and that the woman underneath it had killed before to keep her secret buried. She was about to find out exactly how far Selena Cross would go to make sure it stayed that way. "Good," Selena said, crossing the room and locking the door behind her. "Because you have a habit of walking into private rooms uninvited. Ethan values discretion in his staff." It wasn't phrased as a threat. It was quieter than that, almost gentle, and somehow that made it land harder than if she'd shouted. Mara set the towels down on the dresser without a word and left the room. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat cross-legged on the floor of her small apartment above the garage, laptop balanced on her knees, scrolling back through every photo she'd saved from the Ashford Clinic case 4 years earlier. The security still. The autopsy summary. The fire marshal's report that had never quite added up. She zoomed in on the blurred tattoo above the woman's ear until the pixels dissolved into gray static, and still, she couldn't make it match with total certainty. But the shape was close. Too close to let her sleep. Too close to let it go. The next morning, Mrs. Delgado, the estate's head housekeeper, found her in the pantry restocking shelves and told her Mr. Whitmore wanted to see her in his study before her shift started. Mara's stomach dropped. She assumed, for one paranoid second, that Selina had already gotten to him first. She was half right. Ethan was standing by the fireplace when she walked in, a manila folder open in his hands. She recognized it before he even said anything, her old employment application, the one that had asked about prior work experience, the one she'd filled out honestly because lying on paperwork for a background check felt like a stupid risk to take. "You used to work in forensic document analysis?" he said, not looking up. "Yes, sir." "You didn't put that on your resume when you applied here." It didn't seem relevant to housekeeping. He finally looked at her, and there was something in his expression that wasn't quite suspicion, more like he was recalculating something he thought he already understood. "Your brother was Daniel Bennett. The Ashford Clinic case." Mara felt her pulse spike, but she kept her voice level. "Yes. You never told me that when I hired you. Would it have mattered?" Ethan closed the folder slowly. "I don't fire people for what their family members are accused of. But I do expect honesty from the people who work in my home, Mara. Especially now, with the wedding 2 weeks out and every reporter in this city looking for something to write about." "I understand. Do you?" He set the folder down on his desk. "Selina's security consultant flagged you last night. Said you accessed sealed evidence files related to a 4-year-old arson case at 2 in the morning using the estate's guest network. That's not a coincidence, is it?" Mara's mind raced. She could tell him the truth right now, that his fiancé was hiding a tattoo that matched a woman presumed dead, that something about Selina's vague past didn't sit right, that her brother had died insisting he was framed for exactly the kind of thing Selina might have actually done. But she had no proof. Just a blurry photograph, a locked door, and a feeling she couldn't yet put into words that a jury, or a billionaire fiancé 2 weeks from his wedding, would ever accept. "I needed to see my brother's face again," she said instead, which was true even if it wasn't the whole truth. "The case file has the only photo I have left of him that isn't from a funeral program." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, not full trust, but a crack of sympathy he couldn't quite suppress. "The wedding is in 12 days, he said finally. "Selina asked me to let you go this morning. I told her no." Mara blinked. "Why?" "Because fear isn't evidence." He turned back toward the window, looking out over the gardens. "And I've built a career noticing when people are afraid of something they can't explain. Selina's been different the last few weeks. Tense. I don't think it's wedding stress." For the first time since she'd taken this job, Mara wondered if Ethan Whitmore had noticed more about his own fiancée than he was willing to admit out loud. That night, Selina found her in the laundry room, arms crossed, expression unreadable in the dim light. "You should have taken the opportunity to leave quietly," Selina said. "I need this job." "No," Selina said, stepping closer. "You need answers. I can see it on you." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and set a small brass key down on the folding table between them, deliberate, like she was placing a chess piece. "That key opens the archive room under the east wing. Everything you're looking for is down there. Go after midnight, when the cameras reset for maintenance." Mar didn't touch it. "Why would you help me?" "Because once you see what your brother actually did," Selina said quietly, "you'll finally stop looking at me like I'm the monster in this house." At 12:19 that night, Mara descended the narrow stairwell behind the wine cellar, key trembling slightly in her hand. Rows of steel filing cabinets lined the underground chamber, each one labeled with cold, bureaucratic precision: Estate Holdings, Trust Accounts, Whitmore Family Archive. The brass key fit a cabinet marked Ashford Clinic Settlement. Inside were ledgers, old insurance correspondence, and a fire-damaged patient file with her brother's name typed across the header. The final folder in the drawer told a different story than the one that had put her brother in prison. The $19 million hadn't been stolen from the clinic's operating accounts. It had been quietly wired, in 3 separate transfers, into a shell company that, according to the paperwork in front of her, now held a controlling financial interest in Selina Cross and Ethan Whitmore's upcoming wedding fund. Mara's hands went cold. She reached for her phone to photograph the page. That's when the heavy steel door behind her sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss. A speaker mounted above the cabinets crackled to life, and Selena's voice filled the underground chamber, calm and almost gentle. "You were right about me, Mara. I really am sorry it has to end this way." A thin white mist began hissing out of vents near the ceiling. "Your brother made the same mistake you're making right now," Selena continued. "He thought exposing my face would be enough to stop me." Mara slammed both fists against the steel door. "What mistake? What did he find?" Selena's voice dropped into something almost affectionate, almost sad. "He found out that some people don't stay dead just because everyone agrees they should." The lights cut out, and in the sudden darkness, Mara heard footsteps, slow, unhurried, deliberate, moving toward her between the rows of filing cabinets, and she realized, with the mist already burning the back of her throat, that whoever had just walked into that vault with her wasn't in a hurry at all, because they were certain she had nowhere left to run. The gas filled the archive room faster than Mara expected, and she dropped to the floor on instinct, where the air was still thin but breathable, tearing a strip from the hem of her uniform and pressing it hard against her mouth and nose. Somewhere between the rows of steel cabinets, footsteps kept moving toward her, unhurried, patient, like whoever was down here already knew exactly how this was going to end. A man's voice, low and rough, murmured from somewhere near the back wall. "Where is she?" A second voice answered, closer this time. "Selena wants the phone first. Then we deal with her." Mara recognized the second voice immediately, and it turned her blood to ice. It belonged to Selena's father, Richard Vale, the silver-haired man who'd shaken Ethan's hand at every family dinner with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. She held her breath and crawled deeper into the dark, one hand sweeping blindly across the concrete floor until her fingers found something useful, a cold metal grate set low into the wall, half hidden behind an old filing cabinet. A maintenance vent, barely wide enough for her shoulders. She didn't think. She kicked it twice until the bolts gave, shoved herself through the gap, and dragged the grate back into place behind her just as a flashlight beam swept across the space she'd been lying in seconds earlier. "She's in the wall." Richard's voice roared behind her. Mara crawled through the narrow service tunnel as fast as her lungs would allow, elbows scraping concrete, chest burning from the little bit of gas she'd already inhaled. The tunnel narrowed twice before opening into a metal hatch. She pushed once, twice, and it finally gave way into the cool, damp air of the estate's wine cellar. She stumbled out gasping, and a hand closed around her arm. She spun hard, ready to fight, and froze when she saw it was Ethan. "What happened?" he demanded, eyes wide, scanning the scrape marks down her arms. "Mara, what happened?" "Your fiancé locked me in the archive vault and tried to gas me," she said, still catching her breath. She admitted it. She said my brother made the same mistake I'm making. Ethan's jaw tightened, something hardening behind his eyes that she hadn't seen from him before. "Where is she now?" "I don't know. But her father's down there with 2 men, and they're looking for this." Mara held up her phone, the cracked screen barely holding together, the photo of the shell company documents still saved in the gallery. The $19 million wasn't stolen from the clinic, Ethan. It was moved into a company that partially owns your wedding fund. Someone connected your family to that fire a long time before you and Selena ever met. Ethan took the phone, staring at the photographed page like it might rearrange itself into something less impossible. "That's not possible. Selena's family trust financed most of the venue and catering contracts. If that money is connected to a stolen clinic fund, then Selena isn't just hiding a tattoo," Mara said. "She's hiding an entire identity." Footsteps echoed on the cellar stairs above them. Ethan grabbed Mara's wrist and pulled her through a side passage behind the wine racks, into the estate's old conservatory, glass walls fogged with condensation, rain hammering the panes overhead. "Tell me everything," he said. "Now." So she did. She told him about Daniel, about the clinic fire, about the blurred tattoo in the security photo, about walking in on Selena adjusting a wig in the mirror and catching the edge of a mark she'd spent 4 years trying to forget. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from disbelief to something closer to dread. When she finished, he turned toward the mansion, jaw tight. 3 months ago, Selena convinced me to merge Whitmore Steele's employee pension trust with her family's private wealth fund. She said it would streamline everything before the wedding. It gave her direct access to the fund's records, including a database of protected identities. Former employees in witness protection. People we quietly relocated after the labor fraud case my father settled a decade ago. Mara felt something cold settle in her chest. She's not marrying you for the company. She's marrying me for the database, Ethan said quietly. Access to every hidden identity my family has ever protected. A light flicked on inside the conservatory office at the far end of the glass room. Through the fogged pane, Mara could see a woman's silhouette, not tall enough to be Selena, moving carefully, favoring one side like she was in pain. Ethan pushed the door open. Inside, an older housekeeper named Dolores stood pressed against the wall, a fresh bruise darkening along her cheekbone. Who did this? Ethan demanded, crossing the room in 3 strides. Mr. Vale's men, Dolores whispered. They searched the staff quarters. They're looking for her. She nodded toward Mara. They tore apart every room looking for something your brother left behind. Mara felt her heart stop. What did they say exactly? Dolores reached into her apron pocket with trembling hands and produced a small, sealed envelope. Your brother gave me this 11 years ago. He told me if a woman named Vanessa Croft ever set foot in this house, I was to give it to you, and only you. Mara's hands shook as she tore it open. Inside was a memory card and a short, handwritten note in her brother's familiar cramped scrawl. Mara, if you're reading this, I failed to expose her the way I planned. The fire wasn't an accident. It was set to destroy patient records, but the real target was the woman in room 407. She survived. Find her. She knows everything. D. Ethan slid the memory card into the laptop sitting open on the conservatory desk. A shaky video file loaded, time-stamped 11 years earlier. Daniel appeared on screen, soot smeared across his face, voice hoarse with smoke. If you're watching this, something happened to me. Vanessa Croft ordered the fire alarms disabled. I restored a backup system before they could finish, which means somewhere there's still a record of what really happened that night. She staged the theft to cover payments for unauthorized experiments run on a patient in room 407. That patient is still alive. Find her, and you'll have everything you need to bring Vanessa down. The video cut to static. Ethan stared at the frozen frame of Mara's brother's face, then slowly turned toward her. Room 407 was part of the original Ashford Clinic building. Before it burned, that entire wing was leased to a private research group my aunt used to run. Mara's breath caught. Your aunt? Lillian Whitmore, Ethan said slowly, the color draining from his face as the pieces locked together in real time. Everyone told me she drowned 20 years ago. A sudden, sharp knock rattled the conservatory door before either of them could react. Then the lights inside the glass room flickered red, and every door along the far wall locked shut with a synchronized, mechanical click that echoed through the silence. Outside the fogged glass, standing beneath a black umbrella with 2 armed men flanking her on either side, was Selena, no wig, no makeup, rain running down her exposed scalp, holding up a phone with a live video feed glowing on the screen. On it, an elderly woman with silver hair sat bound to a chair inside what looked like a small stone chapel room. Hello, Ethan, Selena said through the glass, her voice muffled but perfectly clear. I believe it's time you finally met your aunt. Ethan pressed his palm flat against the fogged glass, staring at the woman on the phone screen like he was looking at a ghost. That's not possible, he whispered. She died before I turned 19. She's very much alive, Selena said, tilting the umbrella just enough for the rain to stop dripping down her bare scalp. Though I imagine 20 years locked away has aged her rather badly. She smiled, and it was somehow worse than her screaming would have been. The wedding proceeds in 12 days, exactly as planned. You'll sign the trust merger. Mara will confess to embezzling from the Ashford Settlement Fund. And everyone in this city will keep believing Vanessa Croft died in that fire, because that's what everyone wants to believe. You're insane, Ethan said. No, Selena replied calmly. I'm patient. There's a difference. She lowered the phone. Gas began hissing softly from a vent near the conservatory ceiling, thin white tendrils curling down through the humid greenhouse air. Mara spun, searching for an exit, but steel shutters were already grinding down over every glass panel around them, sealing the room like a vault. "Ethan, the fire extinguisher line," Mara said suddenly, remembering something from her forensic training. Old estates like this one almost always had manual overrides tied to their sprinkler systems, installed decades before anyone trusted a computer to handle fire safety. "Where's the manual valve?" "Behind the citrus trees, there's an access panel," Ethan said, already moving. "My father had it installed after a kitchen fire when I was a kid." Mara grabbed a decorative iron rod from beside a plant stand and swung it hard into the valve casing. Nothing happened. She swung again, harder, until the metal dented and the old valve finally gave way. Water exploded from the sprinkler heads overhead, drenching the conservatory in seconds, triggering the estate's fire alarm system in one deafening wail. The exhaust fans kicked on automatically, reversing direction, dragging the gas upward and out through the roof vents instead of down into their lungs. The steel shutters, wired into the same fire safety circuit, jolted and rose 6 inches before stopping. It was enough. Ethan dropped to the floor, wedged his fingers beneath the gap, and forced it upward with a strained grunt until there was space enough to crawl through. Mara went first, then turned back to help pull Dolores through behind her. Outside, soaked and coughing in the pouring rain, they found the estate's private security team waiting near the garden gate. Men Ethan trusted completely, men he'd apparently called before ever setting foot in the conservatory. "I contacted Detective Rourke before we went down to the cellar," Ethan admitted, breathless. "Selena's men jammed the property's cell signal, but I managed to get one message out." Rourke arrived within the hour, listening in tense silence to the recording recovered from Daniel's memory card. "Room 407, he repeated. "That building's been condemned for years, but the cathedral downtown, St. Augustine's, was built directly over the original clinic's sub-level research wing. City records show the clinic leased that space before the fire." Ethan's face went rigid. "That's where the wedding is being held." "She didn't pick that cathedral by tradition," Mara said quietly, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "She picked it because the last witness who can identify her has been hidden underneath it this entire time." They moved before dawn, slipping through an old service tunnel that ran from the estate's boundary wall toward the cathedral grounds, a route Ethan's security chief swore had been sealed off for decades but clearly hadn't been touched in years, not months. The passage smelled of wet stone and antiseptic, growing colder the deeper they went. At the end of it, a heavy door stood bolted from the outside. Ethan wrenched it open with a crowbar from the security truck. Inside, chained to a narrow cot in what had once been a clinical storage room, was a man, gaunt, scarred along one side of his face, older than Mara remembered, but unmistakably alive. "Daniel," she breathed, and the crowbar clattered from Ethan's hands as Mara crossed the room and dropped to her knees beside her brother. Her brother stared at her like 11 years had folded into a single second. "Mara." His voice cracked. "You grew up." She threw both arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder, hardly able to process that the grave she'd visited every year for over a decade had never actually held him. "They told me you died. I went to your funeral. I've been alone for 11 years thinking you were gone." "They staged it," Daniel rasped, gripping her arms with what little strength he had left. "Ethan's father started it. Vanessa Croft, Selena, perfected it." He explained through broken breaths that the elder Whitmore and Vanessa had used the Ashford Clinic to manufacture false identities for wealthy criminals looking to disappear, and that when Daniel discovered the real records, they burned the clinic and pinned it on him instead of simply killing him outright, because a living scapegoat was more useful than a dead witness. "Why did you warn Mara not to trust me?" Ethan asked, kneeling beside them, voice tight. Daniel turned toward him, exhausted but lucid. "Because the wedding trust merger is already staged in your name. There's a voice authentication clause buried in the paperwork. The moment you say your vows at that altar, the entire Whitmore protected identity database transfers into a shell account Selena controls. The ceremony itself completes the transfer." Ethan's face went pale. The wedding vows complete the merger. Exactly. A sound echoed from the corridor behind them, careful, deliberate footsteps. Rourke drew his weapon, but the door creaked open to reveal an elderly woman stumbling in, silver hair loose around her shoulders, wrists raw from restraints she'd clearly just worked free of. That contains the original Ashford identity files, Lillian Whitmore said, holding up a small black data drive with trembling hands, and a live uplink to every screen inside that cathedral. Mara looked between Daniel and Lillian, her mind racing. Then we expose her publicly. At the wedding. In front of everyone. She'll deny it, Daniel warned, shaking his head. Unless her identity is proven beyond doubt. Lillian touched the raven tattoo mark she wore faintly on her own collarbone, a mirror of the one hidden on Selina's scalp. The tattoo isn't decoration. It was placed over a surgical tracking implant. The clinic used it to verify senior administrators. If a scanner reads that implant in front of witnesses, there's no denying who she really is. Rourke was already moving, pulling a compact black scanner from his jacket. I've had this in evidence lockup for 4 years, waiting for a body that never had it. Looks like we finally get to use it. Mara took the scanner from him, her fingers steady despite everything her body had survived in the last 12 hours, and looked toward the door that led back up into the cathedral above them, toward the altar where, in less than 6 hours, Selina Cross intended to marry Ethan Whitmore in front of the entire city and become the legal owner of every protected identity his family had ever guarded. Then let's go finish what my brother started 11 years ago, she said. By mid-morning, the cathedral was already filling with guests, flowers, and cameras, 300 chairs draped in white silk, chandeliers glowing gold against the stained glass, and not a single person in that building aware that beneath their feet, in a sealed research chamber that had supposedly burned to ash years ago, 5 people had just discovered the truth that would blow the entire wedding apart before noon. We only get one shot at this, Rourke said, laying a folded schematic of the cathedral's sub-level across the hood of his car in the pre-dawn light. Selina's men have had over a decade to fortify this building. If she senses we're onto her before the ceremony starts, she disappears again, and this time she won't leave anyone alive who can identify her. Then we don't let her sense anything, Ethan said. I go in exactly like nothing happened. I get dressed. I stand at that altar. I say my vows like I mean every word of them. Mara stared at him. You can't actually go through with the ceremony. I'm not going to, Ethan said. But she needs to believe I am, right up until the last second, or none of this works. If she panics early, she pulls the trigger on whatever backup plan she's got, and we lose everything. The database, the evidence, your brother's freedom, all of it. Lillian, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, nodded slowly. He's right. Vanessa always builds contingencies. If she thinks the wedding is compromised before it starts, she'll burn this whole operation down rather than let us walk away with proof. Daniel, too weak to stand without support but too stubborn to be left behind, insisted on being wheeled into a converted security van parked 2 blocks from the cathedral, where Rourke's forensic team had set up a live feed from cameras hidden throughout the building. Cameras Ethan's security chief had quietly installed the night before, under the guise of live stream equipment for the ceremony. Mara, meanwhile, changed out of her uniform for the first time since the archive vault, and Lillian handed her a small earpiece. You'll be working with the catering staff, Lillian explained. It's the only role that lets you move through every part of the building without anyone questioning why you're there. Selina's men have seen your face, so you'll need to stay in the kitchen corridors until the ceremony actually starts. And the scanner? Hidden in your uniform apron, Rourke said. The second that tattoo is confirmed live, it transmits directly to the cathedral's AV system, which, thanks to your brother's original clinic override codes, we've already routed through Lillian's data drive instead of the wedding planner's laptop. Daniel managed a faint, exhausted smile from his wheelchair. Some things never expire. By 10 a.m., the cathedral doors opened to the public. Guests arrived in waves, hotel executives, senators, socialites, half the guest list clearly more interested in being photographed near the Whitmore name than in the marriage itself. Mara moved through the service corridors in a plain black catering uniform, apron heavy with the concealed scanner, weaving between waitstaff carrying trays of champagne toward the reception hall. She caught sight of Selena only once before the ceremony, gliding through a side hallway in a robe, hair still hidden beneath a fresh wig fitted that morning by a stylist who had no idea what she was really covering. Selena paused near a mirror, adjusting the veil, and for one unsettling moment, Mara watched her practice a soft, radiant smile in the glass. The exact expression she'd wear walking down the aisle in less than 2 hours, rehearsed like a performance because that's exactly what it was. At 11:40, Ethan stood at the altar in his tuxedo, microphone hidden beneath his collar, jaw set, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the side doors where Mara had disappeared. Rourke and 2 plainclothes officers were seated in the 9th pew, blending in among distant Whitmore relatives no one would question. Lillian waited below the cathedral, hidden near the old research chamber with the data drive, ready to trigger the broadcast the instant Mara confirmed the tattoo. The organ began to play. Selena appeared at the top of the aisle in a gown covered in thousands of hand-sewn crystals, veil trailing behind her, blonde curls catching the light exactly the way they were designed to. 300 guests rose to their feet, phones lifting to capture the moment, completely unaware they were about to become witnesses to something far more explosive than a wedding. Mara watched from the service door at the side of the altar, scanner concealed in her apron, pulse hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. The moment her brother had died trying to reach. The moment that would either clear his name for good, or get every single person in this building killed if something went wrong. Selena reached the altar. Ethan took her hand, his expression a masterclass of calm devotion that betrayed absolutely nothing of what he knew. The priest opened the ceremony book. "We are gathered here today," he began, "to join Ethan Whitmore and Selena Cross in holy matrimony." Mara's earpiece crackled softly. Rourke's voice, barely above a whisper. "Positions confirmed. Lillian's ready below. Wait for my signal." The priest moved through the opening blessing, and Mara counted the seconds, watching Selena's face for any flicker of suspicion, any sign that something had tipped her off. There was none. Selena looked radiant, triumphant, utterly convinced that in less than 15 minutes, she would own not just Ethan Whitmore, but every protected identity his family had ever guarded. "If anyone here objects to this union," the priest continued, following the traditional script no one actually expected to matter, "speak now, or forever hold your peace." Silence stretched through the cathedral, heavy and electric. And that was the moment Rourke's voice cut through Mara's earpiece, sharp and urgent. "Must go now. Security just moved Lillian. She's not answering her radio. Something's wrong down there." Mara's stomach dropped. If Selena's men had found Lillian before the scan could broadcast, the entire plan collapsed, and worse, it meant somebody inside this operation had been compromised. She had exactly one choice left, standing at that service door with 300 witnesses on one side and a woman who had already tried to kill her twice on the other. Walk down that aisle right now, expose Selena with nothing but the scanner in her apron and no broadcast system to prove it to anyone beyond the first few rows, or wait, and risk losing Lillian, the data drive, and the only concrete proof that could send Selena to prison instead of letting her walk free into another stolen identity. The priest's next words rang out across the cathedral. "Then by the power vested in me." Mara stepped through the service door. "I now ask you to exchange your vows." Mara moved down the side aisle fast, weaving between flower arrangements and startled catering staff, apron still tied around her waist, scanner gripped tight in her fist. She didn't have Lillian. She didn't have the broadcast system. All she had was a device that could confirm a tattoo, and a cathedral full of people who had no idea what they were about to witness. "Ethan, please face Selena and take her hands," the priest instructed. Ethan's eyes caught Mara's the second she rounded the corner of the transept, and something in his expression shifted from calm performance to genuine alarm. He knew. He could see it on her face. Something had gone wrong. "Wait," Mara called out, her voice cracking through the hushed cathedral. Every head turned. Selena's smile didn't waver, but her grip on Ethan's hands tightened just slightly, just enough for Mara to notice. "I'm sorry, who let the catering staff onto the altar?" Ask her why she's never let anyone touch her real hair, Mara said, walking forward, scanner still hidden but her free hand steady. Ask her why there's a research chamber underneath this cathedral with a woman chained inside it who's been missing for 20 years. Gasps rippled through the front pews. Somewhere near the back, a phone camera swiveled toward the altar, then another, and another, guests instinctively sensing that whatever was happening was about to be worth more online than the ceremony itself. Selena's composure cracked for exactly 1 second, a flicker of fury behind her eyes, before she smoothed it over with practiced ease. She's unwell, Selena said to the priest, to the guests, to anyone who might still be listening. She's been harassing our staff for weeks. Security, please. 2 men in dark suits started moving from the side of the cathedral, but Rourke and his officers rose from the 9th pew at the same instant, badges out, blocking their path down the aisle. Nobody's removing anyone, Rourke announced, voice carrying clean and hard through the stunned silence. Detective Marcus Rourke, City Police. This ceremony is under investigation. Selena's mask finally slipped all the way. This is insane. You have no. I have a photograph, Mara said, closing the last few feet between them, of a woman who vanished 4 years ago with $19 million and left 2 nurses to die in a fire. And I have a scanner that reads a surgical implant hidden under a tattoo that woman never removed, because she couldn't. Selena lunged, faster than anyone expected, closing her hand around Mara's wrist hard enough to bruise. You should have stayed buried with your brother. Ethan's voice cut through the cathedral like a blade. She's not your brother's replacement, Selena. She's the reason this ends today. Mara twisted her wrist free, and before the security men could reach her, she grabbed the edge of Selena's veil and the wig pinned beneath it and pulled with everything she had left. The wig tore away in one motion, curls, veil clip, comb pins, all of it, and 300 guests watched Selena Cross's shaved, patchy scalp catch the chandelier light, the black raven tattoo stark and unmistakable above her left ear. Mara pressed the scanner against it before Selena could pull away. A single red light blinked, then flashed steady. There was no broadcast screen to display the result across the cathedral the way they'd planned, but Rourke's phone, held up and streaming directly to a secure evidence server, captured it in real time, the scanner's small display glowing with 2 words that Rourke read aloud for every camera and every guest to hear. Identity confirmed. Vanessa Croft. The cathedral erupted. Guests surged toward the exits in a wave of confusion and panic, gowns and tuxedos crushed together in the crowd, chairs overturned as people scrambled for the doors, only to find them locked. She's got remote control over the building, Ethan shouted over the chaos, backing away from the altar. The doors, the lights, everything. Selena, standing beneath the chandelier with her wig discarded on the marble floor, raven tattoo exposed for the world to see, didn't look afraid anymore. She looked furious, and worse, she looked like a woman who still believed she had 1 card left to play. You think tearing off a wig changes anything? She said, her voice rising above the panic, cold and clear. In less than a minute, every file connected to Ashford Clinic disappears. Every protected identity your family has ever guarded, gone. And without those records, there's no proof any of this ever happened. She reached beneath the folds of her gown and produced a small black remote, thumb hovering over a single button. Mara's blood went cold. Where's Lillian? Selena smiled. Exactly where I left her. Tick-tock, Mara. Ethan's earpiece crackled. Rourke's men had reached the lower chamber, and the words that came through made Ethan's face go white. He looked at Mara, then at Selena, then back at the remote in her hand. She's not bluffing, he said quietly. Lillian's unconscious. They can't get the drive. Selena's thumb pressed down. A soft mechanical whir echoed from somewhere beneath the cathedral floor, and on the large screen mounted above the altar, installed originally for the wedding livestream, a countdown appeared in stark red digits. 60 seconds until file deletion. You've already lost, Selena said, backing toward the side exit, guards falling into formation around her. In 1 minute, your brother's proof burns for the 2nd time, and there won't be anything left to salvage. Mara looked at the screen, then at Ethan, then down at the scanner still clutched in her hand, a device that had just confirmed everything, but meant nothing if the only physical evidence in the world was about to be erased forever, 60 seconds from now, in a locked cathedral with no way down to the chamber in time. 54 seconds. Mara's mind raced through everything she knew about the cathedral's layout, every corridor Lillian had walked her through the night before, every shortcut Daniel had mapped out from memory 11 years old and somehow still accurate. There had to be another way down. There had to be. The confessional wing, she said suddenly, grabbing Ethan's sleeve. Lillian said the old clinic had a second stairwell, hidden behind the sacristy, sealed off after the fire but never actually filled in. It's faster than the main passage. That's on the other side of the building, Ethan said, already moving. We'll never make it in under a minute. We don't need a minute, Mara said, sprinting toward the side chapel. We need 10 seconds and a working override code. 41 seconds. Rourke barked orders into his radio as he ran alongside them, guests scattering out of their path, chairs crashing to the marble floor. Cutler, cut the building's remote signal from the security truck, now. If we can't stop the countdown, we jam whatever's triggering it. Copy that, working on it, a voice crackled back, followed by a burst of static that didn't sound promising. 32 seconds. Mara reached the sacristy door and threw her shoulder into it, but it held fast, locked from a system she now understood was tied into the same network controlling every door in the building. Ethan grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a side altar and swung it into the old wood, splintering the frame on the second hit. They shoved through into a narrow stone stairwell that smelled exactly like the tunnel beneath the Whitmore estate, damp, cold, antiseptic beneath the mildew. 26 seconds. They half ran, half fell down the spiral steps, Mara's palms scraping raw against the stone wall to keep her balance. At the bottom, a heavy door stood ajar, weak light spilling through the gap, and beyond it, the same research chamber where they'd found Daniel less than 24 hours earlier, except now Lillian was slumped in a chair near a bank of old servers, a fresh bruise darkening along her jaw, but her eyes were open, blinking, alive. 19 seconds. She's conscious, Ethan said, relief cutting through the panic in his voice as he checked her pulse. Barely, Lillian rasped, forcing her head up. They hit me. Took the drive out of my hand, but, she managed a weak, defiant smile, I'm not stupid enough to only make one copy. 14 seconds. With trembling fingers, Lillian reached into the collar of her blouse and pulled out a second data drive, smaller, hidden on a cord around her neck the entire time. The one they took is a decoy, full of nothing but old maintenance logs. This is the real one. 11 seconds. Mara grabbed the drive and turned to the bank of servers along the wall, the same system that had been wired, according to Lillian's earlier explanation, directly into the cathedral's broadcast network above them. She found a port that matched, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it twice before it finally clicked into place. 8 seconds. A login screen flickered to life on a cracked monitor bolted to the server rack. Mara stared at it, heart slamming against her ribs. It wants an administrator code. 7 seconds. Ethan pushed past her, pressing his palm flat against a small biometric scanner mounted beside the keyboard, one she hadn't even noticed in the chaos. My father registered the family bloodline as an emergency override when he installed this system originally, he said, voice tight. I only found out an hour ago when Lillian told me. 5 seconds. The screen blinked. Access granted. Whitmore, Ethan. 3 seconds. Mara slammed the button marked Preserve and Transmit, praying it would execute faster than the deletion sequence already counting down above their heads. 1 second. The countdown on the cathedral screen froze at the number 2, hung there for a heartbeat that felt like an hour, and then the entire display above the altar flooded with data, financial ledgers, falsified identity records, security footage from the night of the Ashford fire, and video files timestamped years apart showing Vanessa Croft under at least 4 different names, for different faces, for different lives built on the same $19 million and the same buried research chamber. Up in the cathedral, chaos exploded into something closer to pandemonium. Guests who'd been trapped by the locked doors now stood frozen, staring up at a screen broadcasting proof of fraud, kidnapping, and arson in real time, the footage automatically copying itself, according to Rourke's earlier setup, directly to secure servers at the police department and 3 separate media outlets whose reporters happened to be sitting in the wedding's press section. The cathedral doors, wired into the same network that had locked them, released with a synchronized click. Police flooded in through every entrance. Below, in the underground chamber, Ethan helped Lillian to her feet, her legs unsteady but her eyes locked on the monitors still displaying the confirmation message. "It's done," she whispered. "After 20 years, it's finally done." Mara turned toward the narrow stairwell they'd just come from, breathless, half expecting to hear Selena's voice come through some hidden speaker one more time, some final threat, some last card played from wherever she'd disappeared to in the chaos above. Instead, she heard boots on the stairs, fast, heavy, multiple sets, and Rourke's voice shouting down before she could brace herself for who it might be. "Mara, we've got her, but you need to get up here. Now." Something in his tone made her stomach twist. This wasn't the sound of an arrest going smoothly. This was the sound of something going wrong. Mara took the stairs 2 at a time, lungs burning, Ethan close behind her, and burst back into the cathedral to find a scene that stopped her cold in the doorway. Selena stood near the side exit, surrounded by police, hands raised, wig gone, tattoo exposed, the confident fury from minutes earlier replaced by something colder and far more calculating. But it wasn't Selena that had made Rourke's voice shake. It was the man standing 3 feet behind her, flanked by 2 officers who clearly hadn't expected to be arresting him today either. Richard Vale, Selena's father, stood with his hands zip-tied behind his back, rain-soaked tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder from a struggle that had apparently happened just outside the cathedral doors. But it was what he was shouting over and over that had frozen the entire room. "She's not my daughter. I don't even know who she really is." Selena's expression flickered, and for the first time since Mara had met her, something like genuine panic broke through the composure. "Shut up, Richard," she snapped. "I raised her for 6 years thinking she was Selena Cross," Richard shouted, straining against the officers holding him. "I met her at a fundraiser, she said she'd lost her family, I felt sorry for her, and by the time I realized what she actually was, she already had leverage on everything I owned." Rourke stepped between them, holding up a hand. "Everyone's getting processed downtown. Save it for the interview room." But Mara was already moving towards Selena, scanner still clutched in her fist, mind racing through what Richard had just admitted. If he genuinely hadn't known who Selena really was, hadn't been her co-conspirator from the start, then someone else had helped Vanessa Croft build this entire operation from the ground up, someone with access to the Whitmore family's protected identity system long before Selena ever got close to Ethan. "Who taught you the system?" Mara asked, standing in front of her now, ignoring the officers trying to move her aside. "Who gave you access to the Ashford records in the first place? Who told you how to fake your own death?" Selena's eyes, cold and assessing even now, flicked toward Ethan, standing a few feet away with Lillian leaning on his arm. "Ask your fiancé's father," Selena said quietly. "Ask him how well he knew Vanessa Croft before the fire ever happened." Ethan went very still. Lillian's hand tightened on his arm. "It's true," she said quietly, before Ethan could deny it. "Your father and Vanessa didn't just cross paths at the clinic, Ethan. They built the whole falsified identity system together, years before the fire. I found out, and that's why they locked me away. Not because I was a threat to Vanessa alone. I was a threat to both of them." The cathedral had gone eerily quiet, guests still being escorted out in slow, stunned lines, phones still recording every word of what was unfolding at the altar where a wedding had been supposed to happen 20 minutes earlier. "My father's been dead for 3 years, Ethan said, his voice low, almost pleading, like he was hoping someone would tell him this part, at least, wasn't true. "Your father built the system that let her survive," Lillian said gently. "That doesn't mean he's the one who kept it running after he died. Someone else did that. Someone who had access to every account, every trust, every legal document your family owns." She paused, looking directly at Ethan with something like sorrow. "Someone who's been quietly managing your finances for the last 3 years without you ever once questioning it." Ethan's face drained of color as the name surfaced in his mind before Lillian even said it out loud. "Graham," he whispered. My father's estate attorney. As if summoned by his own name, a commotion broke out near the cathedral's rear entrance, officers shouting, a chair overturned, and Mara turned in time to see a tall, silver-haired man in a charcoal suit shoving past a wedding guest and sprinting for the side doors. A man Mara recognized instantly from every legal document she'd seen stacked on Ethan's desk over the past year. A man who'd been standing quietly near the back of the cathedral this entire time, blending in so perfectly with the wedding's legal and financial guests that nobody had thought twice about his presence. Graham Ashcroft, stop! Rourke shouted, breaking into a run, two officers peeling off after him. But Graham was already through the side door and into the rain, and for one heart-stopping moment, Mara thought he might actually get away clean, disappearing into the chaos of fleeing wedding guests and press vans clogging the cathedral's front courtyard. Then a black SUV screeched to a stop directly in his path, cutting off his escape route, and Detective Rourke's backup team, the same officers who'd been quietly monitoring the cathedral perimeter since dawn, exactly the precaution Rourke had insisted on despite Ethan's initial reluctance to involve more police than absolutely necessary, stepped out and had Graham on the ground in handcuffs before he'd made it another 10 feet. Back inside the cathedral, Selina watched the arrest through the open doors with something that almost looked like relief, as if some final piece of tension had finally left her shoulders now that there was truly nowhere left to run and no one left to protect. "He's the one who kept me hidden after the fire," she said quietly, almost to herself. "He's the one who taught me how to become someone new every few years. I was 17 when he found me. Vanessa Croft wasn't even the first name he gave me." Mara felt something shift in her chest, not sympathy exactly, not after everything this woman had done, but something more complicated, the beginning of an understanding that the villain standing in front of her had also, once, been somebody's victim before she ever became somebody else's weapon. "What's your real name?" Mara asked quietly. Selina looked at her for a long moment, rain-soaked and exposed under the cathedral lights, every disguise finally stripped away. "I don't remember any more," she said. That was the whole point. Rourke's officers stepped forward to lead her out, and as they did, Selina glanced back once more, not at Mara, but at Ethan, standing pale and shattered near the altar where he'd almost married a stranger wearing a dead woman's tattoo and a false name built on his own father's crimes. "For what it's worth," she said, "some of it wasn't a performance." Then she was gone, escorted out through the same doors she'd walked through in a wedding gown less than an hour before, and Ethan sank slowly onto the front pew, staring at nothing, while Mara stood beside him, scanner still clutched in her hand, wondering how a story that started with a photograph and a locked dressing room door had ended with 3 arrests, a 20-year-old conspiracy, and a truth about Ethan's own father that he was clearly nowhere near ready to process. The cathedral emptied slowly over the next hour, police tapes stretched across the main doors, forensic teams photographing the altar where a wedding gown lay discarded on the marble floor beside an abandoned bouquet of white roses. Mara sat on the edge of the front pew, still in her catering uniform, watching Ethan stare at his own hands like he didn't recognize them. "I need to see my father's files," he said finally. "All of them. Not the ones Graham managed. The originals." "They might not exist anymore," Lillian said gently, settling into the pew beside him, a paramedic's blanket still draped over her shoulders. "Graham's had 3 years alone with everything. If there was anything left that could implicate your father directly, he's had plenty of time to destroy it." "Then I need to know what's missing," Ethan said. "I built half my life believing my father was a difficult man who worked too much and trusted too little. Not someone who helped build a machine for erasing people." Mara understood that particular kind of grief better than she wanted to admit. The grief of realizing the person you thought you knew had been someone else entirely underneath, and that every memory you'd built your understanding of them on now needed to be re-examined for cracks you'd never thought to look for. "My brother spent 11 years locked in a basement because your father needed a scapegoat," she said quietly. "It wasn't an accusation, not really, just a fact laid plainly between them. I understand wanting to know exactly how deep it goes." Ethan looked at her, something raw in his expression. "I'm sorry. For all of it. I know that doesn't undo 11 years. "No," Mara agreed. "But it's a start." Rourke approached from the side aisle, phone in hand, expression unreadable in the way police officers train themselves to be unreadable when they were about to deliver news that could go either direction. "Graham's talking," he said. "Fast, actually, hoping it'll get him a deal." "He's confirmed everything," Lillian said. "Your father and Vanessa built the falsified identity system together almost 25 years ago, originally as a legitimate witness protection framework for the labor fraud case, before they realized how profitable it could be if they started selling new identities to people who could pay for them instead of people who legally needed them." "And after my father died?" Ethan asked. "Graham inherited operational control, since he was the estate's attorney and already had access to everything," Rourke said. "Vanessa, or Selena, or whatever we're calling her at this point, became his partner rather than his employee. Your engagement wasn't a coincidence, Ethan. It was the plan. Marry into the family, complete the trust merger, and Graham gets direct legal cover for a system that's been quietly selling stolen identities to criminals for over 2 decades. Mara felt sick. "How many people?" "We don't know yet," Rourke admitted. "The drive Lillian recovered has partial records going back 15 years. Full forensic accounting is going to take months. But early estimates put it well past 100 separate identity transfers, most of them tied to fraud, a few tied to considerably worse." Daniel, wheeled in from the security van by a paramedic insisting he needed to be at a hospital rather than a crime scene, listened to this with a grim, exhausted satisfaction. "Room 407, he said. "That's where it started. Whoever was in that room wasn't just a witness. She was the person Vanessa learned the entire process from." Lillian's expression tightened. "Not learned from. Was." Everyone turned to look at her. "I wasn't just a doctor at that clinic," she said quietly, the words clearly costing her something to say out loud after 20 years of silence. "I designed the original identity encryption protocol, back when it really was meant to protect people, trafficking survivors, witnesses, people running from something legitimately dangerous. Your father and I built it together, Ethan, before either of us understood what Graham and Vanessa would eventually turn it into. When I found out what it had become, I tried to shut the whole system down. That's when they locked me in room 407 and let everyone believe I'd drowned." Ethan sat back, absorbing this final layer, his father's crimes now tangled with his aunt's near-death and buried alongside a system his own family had unknowingly funded for 2.5 decades. "So the woman my father hid isn't just my aunt," he said slowly. "She's the reason any of this was even possible to begin with." "I built the lock," Lillian said. "That doesn't mean I forged the key that opened it wrong." Mara stood, walking toward the altar where the wedding had almost happened, staring down at the abandoned bouquet, thinking about the version of today that had almost occurred if she hadn't walked in on Selena adjusting a wig 2 weeks ago. If she'd knocked before entering that dressing room. If she'd stayed quiet the way Selena had warned her to. If Ethan had married a woman built entirely out of stolen names, sealing a database of protected identities into the hands of a man who'd spent 3 years quietly selling people's safety to the highest bidder. "What happens to the identities already sold?" she asked, turning back to Rourke. "The people whose real names were exposed, or who bought new lives from Graham's system. What happens to them?" "That's above my pay grade," Rourke admitted. "But it's going to be a federal case within the week. Witness Protection Oversight, Financial Crimes Division, probably a task force. This isn't staying local." Ethan rose slowly from the pew, and for the first time since the wig had come off at the altar, something like resolve settled into his expression, replacing the shattered disbelief that had been there since Lillian's confession. "I'm going to open every file my family has," he said. "Every trust, every account, every identity record Graham's system ever touched. If there are still people out there whose safety depends on that database staying secret, I want to know how to protect them properly, not the way my father tried to." Lillian reached out and took his hand, the first genuine warmth passing between them since she'd stumbled out of that underground chamber hours earlier. "Your father would have hated hearing this," she said, "but you sound more like the man I hoped he'd become than he ever managed to be himself." Mara watched them, something in her chest finally beginning to loosen after 12 days of fear and 4 years of grief, until her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, an unknown number, no caller ID, A text message that made every ounce of relief drain out of her body in an instant. You should have let me disappear quietly. Now you've made an enemy who's had 20 years to plan for exactly this moment. Room 407 wasn't the only room, Mara. It was just the first one. Mara stared at the screen, her hand tightening around the phone until her knuckles went white. Rourke. He crossed the aisle in 3 strides. What is it? She turned the screen toward him without a word. He read it twice, his expression hardening into the particular stillness of a man recalculating every assumption he'd made in the last 12 hours. Selena's in custody, he said. Booked 40 minutes ago. She doesn't have access to a phone. Then someone's sending this on her behalf, Ethan said, crossing to look over Mara's shoulder. Or she set it up in advance. A dead man's switch. Or it's not from Selena at all, Lillian said quietly, and something in her tone made everyone turn toward her. It was just the first one. Vanessa never talked like that. She was precise. Controlled. That phrasing. She hesitated, staring at the words like they'd reached back through 20 years and touched something she'd buried. That's how Graham used to talk. When he wanted you to know he still had leverage even after he'd already lost. Rourke was already dialing. Graham's in an interview room downtown, he can't have... He stopped mid-sentence, phone pressed to his ear, listening to something that made his jaw tighten. Copy. I need eyes on him right now. The pause. What do you mean he asked for a bathroom break 20 minutes ago and hasn't come back? Mara felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. He walked out of custody? Ethan said, disbelief cracking through his voice. How does a man in a police station just disappear? He's a 70-year-old estate attorney, not a flight risk on paper, Rourke said grimly, already moving toward the cathedral doors, phone still pressed to his ear, barking instructions to someone on the other end. Nobody was watching him like a murder suspect because until an hour ago, nobody knew he was one. Daniel, still pale from 24 hours of adrenaline and exhaustion, gripped the arm of his wheelchair. Room 407 wasn't the only room. He's telling you there's another facility. Another database or another person like me, locked away somewhere Vanessa's confession never touched. Or he's telling us he's coming for the one person who took his entire operation apart in one afternoon, Ethan said, looking directly at Mara. The cathedral felt suddenly too large, too full of shadowed alcoves and unlit side chapels. Every dark corner, a place a desperate man with nothing left to lose could be standing right now. Mara forced herself to breathe evenly, forced her mind back into the same clear, methodical space that had gotten her through the archive vault, the conservatory gas trap, and a 60-second countdown under a burning cathedral floor. He doesn't want me dead, she said slowly, thinking it through even as she spoke. If he wanted me dead, he'd have done it quietly, somewhere private, not sent a text warning me first. He wants something else. What could he possibly still want? Ethan asked. Every file's been broadcast. Every account's been flagged. There's nothing left for him to protect. There's the money, Mara said. 19 million from the original fraud, plus whatever Graham's system made selling identities for 2 decades. That's not sitting in an account with the Whitmore name on it. That's somewhere clean, somewhere only he knows how to access, and if he's got even a few hours before every border and airport gets his photograph, he's not thinking about revenge. He's thinking about disappearing. Then why text you at all? Lillian asked. Mara looked down at the message again, reading it a 3rd time, a 4th, searching for something beneath the words themselves rather than the threat sitting on the surface. You've made an enemy who's had 20 years to plan for exactly this moment. Not I will kill you. Not I'm coming for you. A warning shaped like a threat, but functioning like something else entirely. He's not threatening me, she said slowly. He's stalling me. Keeping all of us focused here, in this cathedral, worried about a phantom threat, while he does something somewhere else. Rourke's phone buzzed again, and this time when he answered, his face went white in a way that told everyone in the pew exactly how bad the news was before he said a single word. They found his car, he said, lowering the phone slowly, parked outside a private storage facility on the east side of the city. One registered under a shell company we haven't cross-referenced yet. What kind of storage facility? Ethan asked. Climate-controlled, Rourke said. High security. The kind of place people rent to store things they can't risk keeping anywhere connected to their real name. He looked up, meeting Mara's eyes. The kind of place a man might use to keep backup copies of an identity database he never trusted to stay in one location. Mara felt something cold and certain settle over her. He's not running. He's making sure the system survives even if he doesn't. Meaning what? Lillian asked. Meaning if we don't get there before he does whatever he's planning, Mara said, already moving toward the cathedral doors. Every identity we just exposed gets sold off individually to the highest bidder before the ink on today's arrest reports even dries. He's not disappearing quietly. He's liquidating everything he's got left, all at once, out of spite. Ethan was already several steps ahead of her, car keys in hand, when Rourke caught his arm. You're not police, Rourke said. Neither of you are. I can't authorize. With respect, detective, Ethan said, not slowing down. You've been chasing paperwork trails all day. We're the only two people in this building who've actually been inside that man's operation and lived to talk about it. You want to stop him before he sells 100 people's safety to the worst bidders on earth, you're going to need us in that car. Rourke stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled sharply and turned toward his own vehicle. Fine. But you do exactly what I say, the second I say it. He pointed a finger at Mara. That includes you. No more running toward gas-filled rooms alone. No promises, Mara said, already climbing into the back seat, adrenaline burning through the exhaustion in her limbs as the reality of the day settled over her again. This wasn't over, not even close, and somewhere across the city, a man who'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of disappearing was about to make his final move before he vanished for good. The storage facility sat at the edge of an industrial stretch near the harbor, a long row of steel units behind a chain-link fence, security cameras mounted every 30 feet, the kind of place that promised discretion to anyone willing to pay for it in cash. Rourke's car screeched to a stop beside two patrol units already parked at odd angles near the entrance, lights flashing silently against the gray afternoon. Facility manager says a man matching Graham's description badged into Unit 214 18 minutes ago. An officer reported as Rourke climbed out, Mara and Ethan right behind him. Hasn't badged back out. Any other exits? Rourke asked. Loading dock on the north side. We've got 2 units covering it. Mara's eyes swept the rows of identical steel doors, and something about the unit number caught in her memory, tugging at a detail from the file drive Lillian had recovered. 214, she said slowly. That's not random. Room 407 divided by 2, minus a digit, or, she shook her head, frustrated at herself for chasing a pattern that didn't matter right now. It doesn't matter. Let's move. They approached Unit 214 in a loose formation, Rourke in front with his weapon drawn, 2 officers flanking, Mara and Ethan held back at Rourke's insistence a full 10 yards behind the group. The steel door stood open 6 inches, dim light spilling out into the gray afternoon. Graham Ashcroft, Rourke called out, voice hard and flat. Police. Step out where I can see you. Silence. Rourke nodded to the officer beside him, who kicked the door the rest of the way open, and they moved in fast, weapons raised, sweeping the interior in practiced, efficient arcs. The unit was empty of any person, but full of everything else. Filing cabinets stacked 3 deep along every wall, hard drives wired into a small server rack humming quietly in the corner, and in the center of the room, a folding table covered in passports, dozens of them, each open to a photo page showing a different face under a different name. The same careful craftsmanship in every forged document that Mara recognized instantly from her old forensic training. He's not here, Rourke said, lowering his weapon slightly, confusion replacing urgency. But he was. Mara stepped past him into the unit, scanning the room with the same methodical eye she'd once used cataloging evidence, and stopped cold in front of the server rack. A monitor sitting on top of it was still glowing, a live countdown timer running in the corner of the screen, 11 minutes and counting, attached to a program window labeled, in plain block text, Mass Distribution Queue. He's already gone, she said, her stomach dropping. This isn't him hiding. This is him triggering an auction. Every identity file on this server is about to be sent out simultaneously to whatever buyer list he's built over the last 3 years. Ethan crowded in beside her, staring at the screen. Can you stop it? Maybe, Mara said, already scanning the file directory, the structure eerily familiar, built on the same encryption protocol Lillian had described designing decades earlier. If this is running on Lillian's original architecture, there might be an administrator override built in, the same kind that let you access the cathedral system. Lillian's not here, Ethan said. No, but she talked me through the logic of it back at the estate, Mara said, pulling up a command window, fingers moving fast over the keyboard, muscle memory from 6 years of forensic document work kicking in despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. She said the whole system was built around family bloodline verification instead of passwords, because Graham and your father didn't trust anything that could be written down or hacked remotely. So it needs a Whitmore, Ethan said, already understanding where this was going. It needs biometric confirmation from someone connected to the original build, Mara said. You did it once already today. Ethan didn't hesitate. He pressed his palm against a small sensor built into the side of the server rack, one Mara hadn't even noticed until the system prompted for it, a green light blinking to life beneath his hand. Access requested. Whitmore, Ethan. Authorization level, family administrator. The countdown on the screen froze at 9 minutes, 41 seconds. It's asking for a secondary confirmation, Mara said, reading quickly. Two-factor. Something Graham would have had to set up himself, which means he built himself an override too, Rourke said grimly, stepping closer. In case anyone ever got this far. Mara's eyes scanned the directory tree, searching, and found a folder buried 3 layers deep labeled with a date from 23 years ago, the same year, according to Lillian's earlier account, that the original identity protection system had first gone live. Lillian still listed as an administrator, Mara said, disbelief coloring her voice. They never removed her. 20 years of running this system, and Graham either forgot or couldn't figure out how to strip her access without breaking something else. She's not here, Ethan said again, more urgently this time. We don't have 9 minutes to drive back and get her. We don't need her here, Mara said, already pulling out her phone. We need her voice. Rourke was already dialing, patching Lillian in through the cathedral's remaining officers on scene, and 30 seconds later her voice came through Mara's speaker, breathless and confused. What's happening? Is everyone all right? We need a voice authentication, Mara said quickly, holding the phone up to a small microphone icon blinking on the screen. Say your full name and today's date, exactly like that. Lillian Elizabeth Whitmore, she said, uncertain but steady, August 5, 2026. The screen blinked once, then displayed a new line of text. Voice print match confirmed. Administrator access granted. The countdown vanished entirely, replaced by a new prompt. Halt distribution queue? Y/N. Mara hit yes before she'd even finished exhaling the breath she'd been holding. The server rack's fans spun down, lights along its front panel shifting from red to a steady, quiet green, and for a moment, the storage unit was almost peaceful, the low hum of electronics the only sound in a room that had, 6 minutes earlier, been on the verge of scattering 100 stolen lives across the world beyond anyone's ability to trace or protect them. It stopped, Mara said, sinking back against the folding table, adrenaline draining out of her all at once, leaving her hands shaking. It's actually stopped. Rourke exhaled hard, holstering his weapon. Then where the hell is Graham? As if summoned by the question, one of the officers stationed near the loading dock's radio crackled to life, tense and fast. Detective, you're going to want to see this. We've got a body. The room went silent. Ethan looked at Mara, then at Rourke, the same unspoken question passing between all 3 of them, whether the person on that loading dock had been running from justice, or had simply become someone else's final loose end. They found him on the concrete apron of the loading dock, face down, one arm bent awkwardly beneath him, a dark stain spreading slowly across the gray. Rourke crouched beside the body, 2 fingers pressed to the man's throat, and after a long moment, shook his head. He's alive, Rourke said, relief and confusion tangled together in his voice. Barely. Pulse is thready. Somebody get paramedics down here now. Mara stared at Graham Ashcroft's still form, the man who'd spent 3 years quietly dismantling Ethan's trust in his own father, now bleeding out on cold concrete with a single stab wound just beneath his ribs. Who did this? That's the question, Rourke said, standing, scanning the loading dock's shadowed corners with fresh urgency. If it wasn't Selena and it wasn't us, there's someone else, Ethan finished grimly. A security camera mounted above the dock door blinked its steady red recording light, and Rourke immediately radioed for the facility's footage to be pulled. Within minutes, an officer brought a tablet displaying the grainy black and white feed, time-stamped 11 minutes earlier, right around the moment Ethan's palm had first triggered the biometric scanner inside Unit 214. The footage showed Graham emerging from a side door, moving fast, glancing over his shoulder more than once. He'd made it barely 20 feet across the loading dock before a figure stepped out from behind a parked delivery van, features obscured by a hood and the poor angle of the camera, and drove something sharp into his side before he could react. The figure crouched briefly over him, seemed to search his jacket pockets, then walked calmly out of frame, unhurried, the same deliberate pace Selena had used descending the archive vault stairs 2 nights earlier. That's not panic, Mara said quietly, watching the figure disappear off-screen. That's someone who's done this before. Rourke paused the footage, zooming as far as the resolution allowed on the figure's retreating back. Facilities got cameras on every exterior door. If they're still on the property, we'll catch them somewhere. Paramedics arrived and loaded Graham onto a gurney, oxygen mask fitted over his gray, sweat-slicked face. One of the officers already reading him his rights between shouted vitals as they wheeled him toward the ambulance. He wouldn't be talking to anyone for a while if he survived at all, which meant whatever answers he might have provided about a second facility, a second room 407, had just been stabbed into silence along with him. He said room 407 wasn't the only room, Ethan said, watching the ambulance doors slam shut. If someone wanted to make sure he never told us where, that timing isn't a coincidence. Someone's cleaning house, Mara said. Selena's in custody, Graham's on his way to surgery if he's lucky, which means whoever's left is protecting something bigger than either of them. Rourke's radio crackled again, another officer's voice cutting through, tighter this time, more urgent. Detective, we've got the suspect on camera 4, North Perimeter, heading toward the water. Requesting backup. They moved fast, Rourke leading, cutting between rows of storage units toward the facility's rear fence line, where the industrial lots gave way to a narrow strip of harbor access road running along the water. A figure in a dark hoodie was climbing over a low chain-link section near the fence's far corner, moving with practiced efficiency despite the awkward angle. Stop! Police! Rourke shouted, breaking into a run. The figure didn't stop, dropping down the other side of the fence and sprinting toward a small aluminum boat tied off at a private dock jutting out into the harbor. Mara pushed herself faster, lungs burning, 12 exhausting days finally catching up with her body even as adrenaline forced her legs to keep moving. The figure reached the boat and fumbled with the ignition just as Rourke reached the fence, weapon drawn but not firing, harbor patrol still minutes away by his own hurried radio call. The boat's engine sputtered, caught, and began pulling away from the dock in a widening arc of dark water. Mara reached the fence seconds later, chest heaving, and watched the boat cut across the harbor, the hooded figure never once looking back. But just before the distance swallowed the details entirely, the wind caught the hood, whipping it back for one brief, unguarded second, and Mara caught a flash of silver-white hair and a profile she recognized instantly, a face she'd seen in exactly one place before, an old photograph tucked inside the Ashford Clinic case file, a woman listed only as a clinic board member who'd resigned quietly the same month the fire occurred, a name Mara had dismissed years ago as irrelevant background. Noise in a case that had already, she'd believed, identified its villain. "That's not possible," she whispered. "What?" Ethan said, arriving breathless beside her. "Mara, who is that?" Mara turned to him, the pieces of 4 years of investigation rearranging themselves violently in her mind, the shape of a conspiracy she'd thought she finally understood suddenly revealing an entire second layer she'd never even suspected existed. "That's Dr. Evelyn Marsh," she said slowly. She was on the Ashford Clinic's board of directors before the fire. Officially, she resigned for health reasons 2 weeks before the blaze and disappeared from public record completely. She watched the boat shrink toward the harbor's far shore, disappearing into the gray haze of the afternoon. I always assumed she just walked away clean. I never once considered that she might have been the one who built the entire system in the first place, and that Vanessa Croft, Selena, was never the architect of any of this at all. Ethan stared at the empty water where the boat had vanished. You mean Selena wasn't the one in charge? I mean, Mara said, the full weight of it settling over her like ice water, we might have just spent 12 days taking down the wrong woman's empire, while the person who actually built it has been standing quietly in the shadows this entire time, watching all of us do exactly what she needed us to do. Rourke lowered his radio slowly, his expression hardening into something grim and focused. Harbor patrols got eyes on the boat now. They'll track her to whatever shoreline she's heading for, but if she's had 20 years to plan an exit like this, she's not going to make it easy. We need everything the department has on Evelyn Marsh, Mara said, already moving back toward the fence line, mind racing faster than her exhausted body wanted to keep up with. Not just the Ashford Clinic file. Property records, shell companies, anything that connects her to Graham or to the original identity system before Ethan's father ever got involved. You think she's the one who actually recruited your father, Ethan said, following her, the question landing somewhere between disbelief and dawning horror. Not the other way around. I think a board member doesn't resign 2 weeks before a fire that conveniently destroys evidence of her own fraud, unless she already knew the fire was coming, Mara said. And I think a woman who spent 20 years successfully vanishing from every record search doesn't do that without serious resources and serious help, long before Graham ever inherited control of anything. Back at the cathedral hours later, after Graham had been stabilized in surgery under police guard and Selena had been formally arraigned on charges that would take the district attorney's office the better part of a week just to finish listing, Rourke spread a fresh set of documents across a folding table set up in what had briefly been the wedding's bridal suite, now converted into a makeshift command post. Property records show Evelyn Marsh owned 3 separate research facilities under maiden and married names going back 30 years, he said, tapping a printed map dotted with red pins. 2 of them were sold off after the fire, liquidated fast, cash buyers, paper trail scrubbed clean. The third one still active, technically owned by a holding company registered in her late husband's name, who's been legally deceased for 11 years. Where? Marist. 2 hours north. Old converted psychiatric facility, converted again sometime in the last decade into what the county records list as a private wellness retreat. Rourke's mouth twisted with grim disbelief. Population records for the surrounding town put staff turnover there at almost 0, which for a facility that size is exactly the kind of pattern you'd expect from a place designed to keep the same small group of people quietly employed and quietly loyal for a very long time. Lillian, sitting in a wheelchair near the window with a fresh bandage on her jaw, went very still. That's not a wellness retreat, she said quietly. I know that building. I trained there, briefly, decades ago, before your father brought me onto the Ashford project. She looked up at Ethan, something like dread passing behind her eyes. Evelyn Marsh was my supervisor before she was anyone's board member. She's the one who taught me the encryption architecture I later built into the family system. Everything I designed to protect people, I learned from her first. The room went quiet. So the entire identity protection system, Ethan said slowly, the one my father twisted, that Graham exploited, that Selena weaponized to marry into my family, all of it traces back to one woman who's been sitting quietly outside every version of this story for 30 years. And she just watched us take down 2 of her subordinates in a single afternoon, Mara said, without lifting a finger, until Graham became a liability she couldn't risk keeping alive. Daniel, still confined to a hospital bed 2 floors below but patched into the conversation through a tablet propped against Lillian's wheelchair, spoke up, his voice weak but clear. That's why she killed him instead of just letting him run. He knew her name. Everyone else in this chain only ever knew the layer directly above them. Selena answered to Graham. Graham answered to Evelyn. As long as that chain stayed intact, She was always going to be the one nobody thought to look for. Until now, Mara said. Rourke folded his arms, studying the map of red pins with the focused patience of a man who'd stopped being surprised hours ago by how deep this particular hole actually went. Federal task force is being assembled as we speak. This stopped being a local case the second we confirmed a body count and an international identity trafficking operation. Officially, my recommendation is that all of you step back and let trained agents handle the facility raid. And unofficially? Ethan asked. Rourke almost smiled, exhausted and grim. Unofficially, every single lead we've had today came from people in this room refusing to sit back and let someone else handle it. I'm not going to pretend federal red tape moves fast enough to reach that facility before Evelyn Marsh has time to disappear again, the same way she's disappeared every single time someone's gotten close in the last 30 years. Mara looked around the room, at Ethan, still absorbing the unraveling of everything he'd believed about his father, at Lillian, confronting the teacher who'd shaped her life's work before that work was stolen and twisted into something monstrous, at Daniel, alive against every odd she'd stopped believing in years ago, still fighting to finish what he'd started 11 years earlier from a hospital bed he refused to stay quiet in. Then we don't wait for the task force, she said. We go tonight before she has time to run again. Rourke studied her for a long moment, then reached for his radio. 2 hours north, he said. If we leave within the hour, we beat sunset. I'll pull together a tactical team, but I want to be very clear with all of you. This isn't a locked cathedral with a countdown clock. This is a woman who's evaded capture for 30 years, on her own territory, with resources we don't fully understand yet. She's also a woman who just personally killed someone to protect her own name, Mara said. Which means she's not thinking as clearly as she wants us to believe. People who've stayed hidden that long don't get sloppy unless something's finally gone wrong enough to scare them. Lillian reached out and gripped Mara's hand, her fingers thin but steady. Then let's go make sure she stays scared. The convoy left the cathedral grounds as the sky bruised into evening, 3 unmarked vehicles and 1 tactical van moving north along a highway that grew emptier and darker with every passing mile, farmland giving way to dense tree line, the last cell tower bars flickering out on Mara's phone somewhere around the 90-minute mark. According to county records, the facility sits at the end of a private access road, gated, about 4 miles off the main highway, Rourke said from the front passenger seat, reviewing satellite images on a tablet by the dashboard's dim glow. Single entrance visible from above. Possible secondary road on the north side, unpaved, might be a service route. She'll have people watching both, Lillian said quietly from the back seat, her voice steady despite the exhaustion carved into her face. Evelyn never built anything with only one way in or out. It's the first thing she taught me. Redundancy is survival. Ethan, driving the second vehicle with Mara in the passenger seat, glanced over at her in the dim light of the dashboard. You've been quiet since we left the cathedral. I keep thinking about the shape of it, Mara admitted. 4 years, I thought I understood exactly who took my brother's life apart. Vanessa Croft, 1 woman, 1 fire, 1 theft. And it turns out she was just the second layer of something that goes back 30 years, run by a woman none of us had ever even heard of until she showed her face for exactly 3 seconds on a boat. Does it change anything? Ethan asked. Now that you know how deep it actually goes? Mara considered the question honestly before answering. No, she said finally. It just means the finish line moved. I still have to cross it. The tactical van slowed a 1/4 mile from the gated entrance, killing its headlights, the rest of the convoy following suit, easing forward under nothing but a thin wash of moonlight through gathering clouds. Rourke's team fanned out on foot, night vision equipment catching the tree line in eerie green relief, while Mara, Ethan, and Lillian waited in the second vehicle exactly as instructed, engine off, breath fogging faintly in the cooling air. 20 minutes crawled by in silence before Rourke's voice crackled low through the radio clipped to the dashboard. Gates unmanned. That's not good. Moving in. More silence. Longer this time. Facilities lit up. Rourke's voice returned eventually, tension threading through the words. But it's quiet. Too quiet. No visible security patrols. We're advancing to the main building. Mara's grip tightened on the door handle, every instinct from the last 12 days screaming that quiet like that never meant safety. It meant a trap, or it meant something had already happened before they arrived. 10 more minutes passed before Rourke's voice returned, different this time, careful in a way that made Mara's stomach drop before he'd said a single concrete detail. "We're clear to bring the civilians up. But I want you prepared for what you're about to see." The main building rose out of the darkness as they approached on foot, old stone architecture updated with modern security fencing and camera housings that stood dark, powered down, useless. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over long institutional hallways, doors standing open on empty rooms, filing cabinets pulled out and left gaping, papers scattered across the floor like something had been searched through in a violent hurry. "She knew we were coming," Ethan said, staring at the chaos. "Or she's been packing up for longer than we think," Lillian said quietly, moving through the hallway with the eerie familiarity of someone retracing steps from decades earlier. "This isn't panic. Look at what's missing. The server racks are gone, cables cut clean, not ripped. The filing cabinets are empty of anything current, only outdated paperwork left behind as camouflage." She stopped in front of a heavy door at the hallway's end, marked with a faded number plate that made Mara's breath catch. "Room 407. "There's more than one," Lillian said softly, understanding dawning in her voice. "Every facility she's ever run has a room 407. It's not a location. It's a designation. Whatever she keeps in that room is the one thing she never lets anyone else access." Rourke reached the door first, testing the handle, finding it unlocked, swinging it open slowly with his weapon raised out of habit even though the building had read as empty for the last 20 minutes. The room beyond wasn't a research chamber or a detention cell like the one beneath the cathedral. It was an office, spare and clinical, a single desk, a single chair, and mounted on the far wall, a corkboard covered in photographs connected by threads of red string in the deliberate, obsessive pattern Mara recognized instantly from every crime documentary she'd ever half-watched and dismissed as exaggerated fiction. Except this wasn't fiction, and as she stepped closer, her own photograph stared back at her from the center of the board, alongside Ethan's, Daniel's, Lillian's, even Rourke's, each connected by threads leading outward to dozens of other faces Mara didn't recognize, spanning what looked like years of careful, patient documentation. "She's not just been running from us," Mara said slowly, the horror of it settling over her like a physical weight. "She's been watching all of us for years, long before any of this started. This board isn't reactive. Look at the dates." Rourke leaned closer, scanning a handwritten timeline pinned along the board's edge, and his expression went rigid. "These entries go back before the wedding was even announced," he said. "Before Selena ever met Ethan." Ethan stared at the board, his own face staring back at him from photographs taken at events he barely remembered attending. "She planned this. All of it. Selena marrying me wasn't Graham's idea at all." "It was an audition," Lillian said quietly, staring at a photograph of her own younger self pinned near the board's corner, decades old, taken from an angle that suggested it had been captured without her knowledge. "Evelyn's been building towards something bigger than one wedding for a very long time. Selena, Graham, even your father, they were pieces she moved into position. And now that two of those pieces are gone, she's not running scared." Lillian turned slowly, meeting Mara's eyes across the room. "She's clearing the board for whatever move comes next." A soft, deliberate sound echoed from a hidden speaker mounted above the corkboard, and every person in the room froze as a woman's calm, unhurried voice filled the space, cutting through the silence like she'd been waiting, patiently, for exactly this moment to speak. "Hello, Mara. I've been looking forward to finally meeting you properly." Mara's blood went cold, but she forced her voice steady, scanning the room for the source of the speaker. "Where are you?" "Somewhere you'll never think to look, which is precisely how I've survived for 30 years, Evelyn Marsh said, her voice carrying an unsettling warmth, like a teacher pleased with a promising student. "You should be proud of yourself. In 12 days, you've undone more of my work than anyone has managed in 3 decades. Vanessa was careless toward the end. Graham was greedy. But you, Mara, you were thorough. Patient. That's rare." "You killed Graham to keep him quiet," Mara said. That's not the behavior of someone who admires patience. Graham outlived his usefulness the moment he panicked and tried to liquidate everything at once instead of trusting the process, Evelyn said. I don't tolerate carelessness in people I've invested in. I imagine that sounds harsh. It's simply practical. Rourke was already moving along the walls, scanning for camera housings, wiring, anything that might trace the audio feed to its source, while two of his team fanned out silently into the corridor beyond. Your search is wasted effort, Detective, Evelyn's voice continued, almost amused. I'm not in the building. I haven't been for hours. This message was recorded to play the moment someone finally found their way to room 407, which I confess, I did not expect to happen quite this quickly. Then why leave a message at all? Ethan asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. If you're already gone. Because I owe your family a debt of gratitude, Ethan, whether you believe that or not, Evelyn said. Your father was the first person willing to fund what I'd spent years trying to build. Without him, none of this existed at all. Without Graham's greed, none of it would have unraveled quite so publicly. And without Mara, her voice softened, almost fond, I never would have learned exactly how far someone with nothing left to lose is willing to go. That's valuable information. I intend to use it. Use it for what? Mara demanded. I've spent 30 years building one system, Evelyn said. It's time to build a second, somewhere none of you will think to look, using everything I've learned watching all of you dismantle the first one so beautifully. Consider this a professional courtesy, being told you'll never see me coming. The recording clicked off, the speaker falling silent, leaving the room in a heavy, unbroken quiet. Lillian sank slowly into the chair behind the desk, her hands trembling against the armrests. She's not going to stop, she said quietly. This isn't an ending for her. It's research. Then we make sure it's the last chapter she ever gets to write, Rourke said grimly, already on his radio, calling in the Federal Task Force coordinates, initiating a full forensic sweep of the facility, dispatching alerts to every airport and border crossing within 500 miles even though everyone in the room understood, with a kind of exhausted certainty, that a woman who'd evaded capture for 30 years wasn't going to be caught by an alert bulletin issued 4 hours after she'd already vanished. Daniel's voice crackled through the tablet Lillian still carried, having listened to the entire exchange from his hospital bed 2 hours south. She's not wrong about one thing, he said quietly. This isn't over. It's never going to fully be over. But that doesn't mean tonight didn't matter. Mara walked slowly toward the corkboard, staring at her own photograph pinned at its center, threads radiating outward into a web of manipulation that had shaped the last 12 days of her life without her ever knowing the true hand guiding it. She reached out and carefully unpinned it, holding it in her palm. She wanted us to feel like pieces on a board, Mara said. Like everything we did because she let us. But she didn't let us find Daniel. She didn't let us stop the deletion countdown. She didn't let us catch Selena or Graham. We did that in spite of her, not because of some plan she designed. Does that matter if she's still out there? Ethan asked. It matters because it means she's not infallible, Mara said, meeting his eyes. She's rattled enough to leave a recorded message bragging about a system she hasn't even built yet. People who are truly in control don't need to announce how far ahead they are. They just stay ahead quietly. She folded the photograph and slipped it into her pocket. She's not as untouchable as she wants us to believe. We just proved that today. Rourke lowered his radio, exhaling slowly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders despite the exhaustion evident in every line of his face. Federal team's 20 minutes out. They'll process this whole facility properly, but based on what we're seeing, I don't think we're finding anything here that Evelyn didn't want us to find. This whole room feels staged. A message, dressed up as a headquarters. Then we go home, Lillian said, though her voice carried the particular weight of someone who understood that home after tonight would never quite feel finished the way it had this morning. We survived today. That has to be enough for now. Outside, dawn was beginning to soften the edges of the tree line, the long night finally giving way to something resembling morning, and Mara stood in the doorway of room 407 one last time, staring at the empty desk, the dark corkboard, the threads that no longer connected to anyone actively pulling them. 12 days ago, she'd been a housekeeper polishing silverware, quietly grieving a brother she believed had died alone and disgraced. Now she was standing in an abandoned facility 2 hours from home, having helped expose a 30-year conspiracy, reunited with a brother very much alive, and staring down the reality that the woman ultimately responsible for all of it was still out there somewhere, already planning whatever came next. She thought about the ceremony that never finished, the vows never spoken, the wig that had come off in her fist in front of 300 witnesses and started all of this. She didn't regret a single second of it. The trial began 4 months later, in a downtown courthouse packed tighter than the cathedral had ever been, reporters lined up outside from before dawn, the story having long since outgrown the wedding that started it. Selena Cross, formally charged under the name Vanessa Croft, though the prosecution's own documents admitted even that might not be her original name, sat at the defense table in a plain gray suit, no wig, hair grown back in soft, uneven patches she made no attempt to hide anymore. Mara testified for the better part of 2 days. She walked the jury through the dressing room door she should have knocked on, the photograph she'd carried for 4 years, the archive vault, the gas, the countdown beneath the cathedral floor. She kept her voice level even when the defense attorney tried, repeatedly, to paint her as an obsessive employee chasing a conspiracy theory rather than a woman who'd simply refused to stop asking questions everyone else had been paid, threatened, or frightened into abandoning. Daniel testified from a wheelchair he no longer strictly needed but used anyway, out of habit, out of the particular exhaustion 11 years underground leaves in a person's bones. Lillian testified about the system she'd built to protect people and watched twisted into something that had nearly erased her too. Graham, recovering enough to stand trial separately, took a plea deal in exchange for testimony that filled in gaps even Rourke's investigators hadn't fully mapped, though he could offer nothing solid on Evelyn Marsh beyond the same unsettling certainty everyone else had reached. She was gone, and she had planned to be gone long before any of them ever learned her name. Selena was convicted on 19 counts, including fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy in the deaths of the 2 nurses at Ashford Clinic. She showed almost no reaction when the verdict was read, except once, when she turned briefly and looked at Mara sitting in the gallery, and something passed between them that wasn't quite an apology, but wasn't nothing either. "You were the only person in 20 years who actually saw me," Selena said quietly, before the bailiffs led her out, "instead of just the name I was wearing that week." Mara didn't answer. She wasn't sure there was an answer that fit. Outside the courthouse, 6 months after the wedding that never happened, Ethan Whitmore stood beside Mara on the front steps while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions neither of them planned to answer today. He'd spent the months since the wedding dismantling what remained of his father's estate holdings piece by piece, working with federal investigators to identify and quietly protect every name Graham's system had ever touched, funding a task force dedicated entirely to finding people whose real identities had been sold, stolen, or erased. "Any word?" Mara asked, once the crowd had thinned enough to speak without 12 microphones catching every word. "Nothing," Ethan said. "Evelyn's gone quiet. No transactions, no facilities, no photographs. Rourke says that either means she's finally stopped, or she's exactly as good at disappearing as she claims to be, and we won't hear from her again until she's ready for us to." "I don't think she's stopped," Mara said. "Neither do I," Ethan admitted. "But I've stopped letting that be the only thing I think about." Lillian had taken over what remained of the original Ashford protective framework, rebuilding it from the ground up with federal oversight this time, actual accountability instead of a single family's discretion, dedicating the rest of her career to making sure no one could ever again turn her life's work into a weapon. Daniel had joined her, slowly rebuilding a career 11 years of wrongful imprisonment had stolen from him, working now as a security consultant specializing in exactly the kind of fraud that had once destroyed his life. And Mara, 6 months removed from a gray and white uniform and a locked dressing room door, had turned down every job offer that came pouring in once her name became public: forensic firms, true crime consultants, even a cable network wanting to option her story for a documentary. Instead, she'd opened a small independent practice with Daniel, dedicated to reopening cases exactly like their own, ordinary people quietly destroyed by the powerful, cases everyone else had long since stopped asking questions about. On the practice's opening day, Ethan showed up unannounced with a single case file under his arm, the first official referral the new firm had ever received, an old fraud case involving a former Whitmore employee wrongfully terminated years before Ethan had ever taken over the company. "You didn't have to do this," Mara said, taking the file. "I know," Ethan said. "I wanted to. Some debts don't finish just because a trial ends." Mara looked down at the folder in her hands, then back up at the small, unremarkable office she and Daniel had built out of nothing but stubbornness and a shared refusal to let the powerful decide whose stories got remembered and whose got quietly erased. There had been no wedding that day at St. Augustine's Cathedral. But there had been something else instead, the truth, finally standing in the light after 20 years buried underground, and a family rebuilt not through vows spoken at an altar, but through everything that came after someone dared to pull the mask off in front of the whole world and refused to look away from what was underneath. Somewhere, Evelyn Marsh was still out there, patient and unhurried, already 3 steps into whatever came next. Mara knew that. She'd stopped pretending otherwise months ago. But she also knew something else now, something the 12-day nightmare that started with a wig and a stranger's hidden tattoo had taught her more clearly than 4 years of grief ever had. That the truth didn't need to win completely, all at once, to matter. It only needed one person willing to keep pulling at the thread, long after everyone else had decided it was safer to let it lie. She opened the new case file, sat down at her desk, and got to work. The story could have ended there, at that desk, with a case file and a fresh start. But if you've made it this far, you already know that endings like this one rarely stay quiet for long, and there's one more piece of this that deserves to be told before the lights come up. 3 weeks after Mara opened that first referral file, a package arrived at the small office with no return address, postmarked from a city 2,000 miles away. Daniel wheeled himself over to the front desk out of habit more than suspicion these days, but something about the careful, deliberate handwriting on the label made Mara's stomach tighten before she'd even touched it. Inside was a single photograph. Old, slightly yellowed, the kind of print that hadn't been touched by a printer in decades. It showed 3 people standing outside a research building Mara didn't recognize, decades younger versions of faces she now knew far too well, Evelyn Marsh in the center, flanked by a much younger Ethan's father on one side, and on the other, a woman Mara had never seen before in her life. No note. No explanation. Just the photograph, and on the back, in that same careful handwriting, 4 words. "You're closer than you think." Mara stared at it for a long time before she finally picked up the phone and called Ethan. "She's not hiding," Mara said, once he'd arrived at the office and turned the photograph over in his hands the same way she had, searching for something that wasn't there. "She's inviting us to keep looking." "Why would she want that?" Ethan asked. "She got away clean. Why leave a trail at all?" Mara thought about the corkboard in room 407, the photographs, the red string, the years of patient documentation. Because for someone like her, disappearing completely isn't a victory. It's just survival. She wants to be found on her terms, when she's ready, by people she's decided are worth the trouble. She looked up at him. "She's not hiding from us, Ethan. She's testing us. Seeing if we're patient enough to actually catch up to her, or if we'll get distracted rebuilding our lives and let her walk away for good." Rourke, when they brought him the photograph the next morning, ran it through every database his department had access to and came back 3 days later with a name that made the entire investigation feel, once again, like it had barely scratched the surface. The woman standing beside Evelyn in that faded photograph had a name buried under 2 decades of falsified records, connected to a private banking network Rourke's financial crimes unit had been quietly investigating for entirely unrelated reasons, long before Mara Bennett had ever pulled a wig off at an altar. "This isn't just bigger than we thought," Rourke said, spreading a new set of documents across Mara's desk, the office suddenly feeling far too small for the scope of what was unfolding across it. "This might be bigger than any of us can fully see yet. Evelyn Marsh isn't the top of this. She's a floor. There might be more above her." Daniel, listening from across the room, let out a slow breath. "So it really doesn't end?" "No," Mara said, staring down at the photograph, at Evelyn's calm, unreadable expression frozen decades in the past, already 3 steps ahead of everyone standing in that office right now, the same way she'd been 3 steps ahead of all of them from the very beginning. It doesn't end. It just gets bigger. And maybe that's exactly why this story landed the way it did with everyone who followed it. Not because it wrapped up neatly with a bow, but because it didn't. Because real conspiracies, real corruption, real people who spend their entire lives building empires out of other people's stolen identities, don't collapse in one clean afternoon just because one brave woman tore a wig off in front of 300 wedding guests. They unravel in layers. Slowly. Painfully. One thread at a time, pulled by people who refuse to stop asking questions long after everyone else has decided it's safer to look away. Mara Bennett didn't get her happy ending wrapped up in a bow. She got something better, and something far more honest. A brother back from the dead, a family rebuilt out of nothing, a career reclaimed on her own terms, and the absolute certainty that no matter how deep this conspiracy went, no matter how many Evelyn Marshes were standing quietly behind every Selena Cross and every Graham Ashcroft, she was never going to stop pulling that thread. Because that's what the powerful count on every single time. They count on people getting tired. They count on the story fading from headlines, the outrage cooling, the witnesses moving on with their lives while the truth stays buried in a locked room nobody's brave enough to open twice. Mara Bennett proved them wrong once, in a cathedral, in front of the whole world. And somewhere out there, in an office with a new case file on her desk and a faded photograph pinned to her own corkboard now, she was getting ready to prove them wrong again. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, if you felt your stomach drop the moment that wig came off at the altar, if you found yourself rooting for Mara through every locked door and every countdown clock, that's exactly why stories like this one deserve to be shared with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's been buried. Drop a comment below and let us know the exact moment this story hooked you. Was it the wig coming off in the very first scene? The gas filling the archive vault? The 60-second countdown beneath the cathedral floor? Or was it that final twist, the photograph in the mail, the quiet reminder that some conspiracies run deeper than anyone ever expects? If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like Mara's aren't going anywhere. There are more secrets buried beneath more altars, more wigs hiding more truths, more powerful families with more locked rooms they never expected anyone brave enough to open. And if this story hit you the way it hit thousands of others, do one simple thing before you go. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who's ever felt invisible in a room full of powerful people. Someone who's ever been told to stay quiet, to know their place, to let the people in charge keep their secrets buried. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that the maid in the uniform nobody looked twice at was the one person brave enough to burn the whole lie to the ground. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today, and stay tuned, because Mara Bennett's story isn't over yet. There's a floor beneath Evelyn Marsh nobody's found the bottom of, and when we do, you'll be the first to know. We'll see you in the next one. The wig came off in Mara Bennett's fist before the bride even knew what was happening, and in that 1 second, 300 wedding guests watched the most powerful family in the state fall apart. Don't marry her, Ethan. The scream ripped through St. Augustine's Cathedral half a breath before the priest could say the word, husband. The organ music died mid-note. Every head in the pews turned at once. The livestream camera mounted near the altar swung hard to the left, still rolling, still recording every second of what was about to happen. Standing at the end of the aisle was Mara, not in a gown, not in anything close to wedding attire, but in her gray and white housekeeping uniform, soaked from the rain outside, her chest rising and falling like she'd sprinted the last mile to get there in time. Her hands trembled. But her eyes never left the woman in white standing at the altar. Ethan Whitmore turned first. Steel heir, self-made beyond his father's fortune, a man who prided himself on reading people before they ever spoke, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, his face went completely blank with shock. The woman who had quietly cleaned his family's mansion for the last year was standing in his wedding, screaming his fiancé's name like an accusation. His bride, Selena Cross, didn't look confused. She looked caught. "Security," she snapped, her voice cracking through the silence. "Get her out. Now." Two men in black suits broke from the side wall and moved fast down the aisle toward Mara. She didn't run. She didn't even step back. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, creased photograph, raising it high above her head so every camera and every guest could see it. "Ask her why she changed her name 6 years ago," Mara said, her voice shaking but carrying to the back pew. "Ask her why she's never once let anyone touch her real hair. Not her stylist. Not her own mother. Nobody." Selena's face drained white. Ethan's hand, still holding the wedding Bible, dropped to his side like it had turned to stone. "What is she talking about?" His voice was barely audible. "She's obsessed with me," Selena said, spinning to face him, panic flickering behind perfectly lined eyes. "She's been following me for weeks, Ethan. She's unwell. Don't listen to a word she—" Mara reached the altar steps before security could close the distance. Selena moved first. She lunged, slapping Mara across the face hard enough to snap her head sideways, then grabbed a fistful of her uniform collar. That was the mistake. Mara caught Selena's wrist mid-motion, steady as stone despite the sting still burning across her cheek. And before the guards could pull her back, before Ethan could say another word, before Selena could even register what was happening, Mara's hand shot upward, closed around the crown of soft blonde curls pinned beneath the cathedral veil, and pulled. The wig tore free in one clean motion, curls, veil clip, and all, leaving Selena standing frozen in front of 300 people and a live-stream camera that was, at that exact moment, being watched by over 4,000 strangers online. A single gasp rolled through the cathedral like a wave hitting stone. Beneath the wig, Selena Cross's real hair was shaved down to patchy, uneven stubble, the kind of cut that happens in a hurry, more than once, over months, not the kind that happens by choice. And just above her left ear, unmistakable even from the back pews, sat a tattoo. A small black raven with its wings spread wide, a single silver line slashed clean through its chest. The exact mark burned into the photograph still raised over Mara's head. The exact mark that belonged to a woman investigators had declared dead 4 years ago, after she disappeared with $19 million from a private research clinic's patient trust accounts, and left 2 nurses trapped inside a records room that burned to the ground before anyone could pull them out. Ethan stared at the tattoo like it might reach out and burn him too. The priest quietly closed the ceremony book. Near the back of the cathedral, an older man in an immaculate tuxedo, Selena's father, began inching toward a side exit, careful, unhurried, like a man who'd rehearsed this exit 100 times in his head. He didn't make it 3 steps. A man sitting quietly in the 9th pew, a man none of the 300 guests had paid any attention to all morning, rose to his feet and pulled a badge from inside his jacket. "Nobody," Detective Marcus Rourke said, his voice calm enough to be terrifying, "is leaving this cathedral. Not until someone explains why a woman who died 4 years ago just tried to marry into the Whitmore family." 12 days earlier, none of this seemed possible. 12 days earlier, Mara Bennett believed this wedding was going to be the happiest day the Whitmore estate had seen in a decade, and she had absolutely no idea she was about to blow it apart on livestream in front of the entire East Coast social register. The Whitmore estate sat on 11 private acres just outside the city, all pale stone and glass, gardens trimmed into lines so exact they looked less like landscaping and more like a blueprint someone had brought to life. Ethan had inherited it after his father's sudden death 3 years earlier, but he'd spent most of his adult life turning Whitmore Steel into something far bigger than his father ever imagined. He was 39, deliberate, careful about who he let close, and the staff respected him for one simple reason. He noticed things wealthy men usually didn't bother to notice. He knew which gardener was saving to bring his mother over from Manila. He knew which chef had a daughter starting nursing school in the fall. He also knew that his newest housekeeper, Mara, always arrived 20 minutes early and left every room spotless, even the ones nobody had asked her to touch. What Ethan didn't know was why she'd really taken the job.